At 6 p.m. on the 26th of January 1808, 20 years to the day after the First Fleet had landed at Port Jackson, the New South Wales Army Corps marched to Government House to arrest Governor William Bligh. Bligh's daughter tried to fight them off with her umbrella, but they soon found William Bligh hiding behind his bed. Major George Johnston, the leader of the military, took over as acting governor, while Bligh was held under house arrest. Australia's first and only military coup was complete.
These are the blunders from down thunder that made Australia great.
Welcome to this episode of Blunders Down Under, laughable lessons from the past, in which we talk about dumb decisions from the past that have helped make Australia great. I'm Josh McGrath.
And I'm John Gibbs, and today we're talking about William Bligh, a sailor and governor notorious for his harsh style of leadership and his ability to incite mutiny and rebellion.
So, who was William Bligh?
Born in 1754, William joined the Royal Navy at the age of 7. In 1776, he was appointed by Captain Cook to be the master of the ship Resolution on a voyage to the Pacific Ocean. After Cook was killed and his second-in-command died of tuberculosis, Bligh successfully navigated the expedition back to England in 1780. In 1781, he fought in the Battle of Dogger Bank and was promoted to the rank of lieutenant.
How did he get started with inspiring mutinies in his sailors?
In 1787, Lieutenant Bligh sailed the Bounty to Tahiti to obtain breadfruit trees. It was a difficult trip with adverse winds and stormy seas, and some crew members resented Bligh's authoritarian leadership style. One night, shortly after leaving Tahiti, a group of sailors surprised Bligh in his cabin and tied him up. They put Bligh and 18 loyal crewmen on one of the ship's lifeboats and set him loose. With very limited food and water and no navigation instruments, Bligh successfully steered the boat almost 7,000 kilometres to Timor. It was a magnificent feat of seamanship.
Did Bligh suffer any other criticisms of his captaincy as a sailor?
10 years later, Bligh suffered another mutiny when he was captain of the Director. Then, in 1805, he was tried and reprimanded for tyrannical, oppressive and unofficer-like conduct. He appeared to be establishing a pattern of behaviour.
How did Bligh's reputation as a harsh authoritarian help him in his career?
The authorities were looking for a strong-minded person to be the next governor of New South Wales, as previous governors had been reporting problems with discipline. William Bligh was the man they chose, and they sent him off in a convoy of ships under the command of Captain Short. Soon after leaving, Bligh refused to follow Short's orders and started a petty feud with him.
What happened when Bligh arrived in Sydney?
On arrival in Sydney in August 1806, Bligh was greeted by George Johnston on behalf of the military, Richard Atkins on behalf of the civil officers, and John MacArthur on behalf of the free inhabitants. However, shortly after, Bligh received addresses from other groups of free settlers who repudiated MacArthur's right to speak on their behalf, so it was immediately apparent that there would be serious divisions that Bligh would have to deal with.
What was an early issue that Bligh had to deal with?
One of the main forms of currency being used in the colony was rum. Rum was being used as payment for food, labour and the necessities of life. One of the first things that Bligh did was to prohibit the use of liquors as a form of payment. As the military controlled the rum trade, this didn't endear Bligh to the military.
Why did the people of Sydney start to fear and dislike Bligh?
Bligh introduced a series of ruthless changes. All dogs were to be shot. A row of houses occupied by former convicts was demolished without any compensation. Bligh used abusive and degrading language when addressing prisoners and vagrants. He appeared to derive pleasure from signing death warrants. If anybody tried to remonstrate with him, he became angry and abusive.
What caused the wealthier people of Sydney to turn against Bligh?
In August 1807, the colony's leading merchants wrote to Bligh requesting permission to tranship some goods. Bligh refused permission and prosecuted the merchants for writing a letter in terms which were derogatory to his rank and authority. They were found guilty, fined £100 and imprisoned for 1 month.
How did Bligh stir up the opposition of John Macarthur?
In October, Bligh noticed that John Macarthur, the richest person in the colony, had imported 2 stills, and he ordered that the stills be seized. Macarthur sued successfully for misappropriation of property. In December, Bligh ordered the owners of the schooner Parramatta to pay £900 on the ground that it had carried an escaped convict. Macarthur, who was part owner, refused to pay. A warrant was issued summoning Macarthur before a bench of magistrates. When it was served on him, Macarthur, in a great rage, told the chief constable to inform the persons who sent him that he would never submit to the horrid tyranny unless he was forced.
What happened when Macarthur's response arrived?
A warrant was then issued for the arrest of John Macarthur. He applied for and was granted bail. His trial before a panel of military officers for inciting the people to hatred and contempt of the government began on 25th January 1808. No decision was reached that day, and the next day, the 20th anniversary of the foundation of the colony, was traditionally observed by drinking and merriment. Early that morning, Macarthur was rearrested, and the military officers who were trying him asked Bligh to restore him to bail. Bligh responded by informing the military officers that they were being charged with inciting rebellion.
What did the commander of the military do?
Major George Johnston, the commander of the military, was summoned to Sydney by Bligh, and on the way he had to decide whose side he was on. He wrote to Bligh advising that Bligh had been charged with crimes that rendered him unfit to exercise authority in the colony, and was therefore required to submit to arrest. Major Johnston marched on Government House, arrested Bligh, and assumed power as Lieutenant Governor of New South Wales.
What happened to the trial of John Macarthur?
The trial of John Macarthur resumed, but it soon became apparent that it was now Bligh and his accomplices that were on trial. The court unanimously acquitted Macarthur.
And how did Bligh's story end?
Eventually, Governor Macquarie was sent to Sydney to replace Bligh, and Bligh returned to England to try to clear his name. A court-martial was held. Bligh was cleared of wrongdoing, and he was promoted to Rear Admiral. He died in December 1817 at the age of 65, and there was no public display of grief in Sydney when the news arrived.
Well, what's the moral of this story?
A leader who is ruthless and demanding and prone to fits of anger without cause raises up unnecessary opposition, which severely limits the success of his mission.